Hey guys, today we are going to do some watercolor painting, and if you would like to follow along to this tutorial, I would suggest you get some watercolor paper ready, a pencil and an eraser, a couple of watercolor brushes, a medium-sized and a small one, a nice big jug of water, and a set of watercolor paint. And now let's get our subject matter ready. Today I will show you how to paint figs with watercolor. And of course, as you know, I'm a big favor of working from real life. So today in the morning I went over to my parents' place to pick some fresh figs from the tree. And here they are. What I'd like to do first is to cut one of these up in half. And let's have a look. Do I like this one? Yeah, this one's quite beautiful. Let's cut a couple more up and see which one is the best for using as a model. Oh, I love this one. This one's got a hollow inside. So that's a good candidate. Okay. So far, let's have a look at what we've got. We've got the green one that is hollow inside, and we've got the purple one that is quite filled up inside. Let's look at both of them. And oh, look at this, look at the ant. Oh, look at the little ant. Okay, I'll just leave this one in here in the box and leave the little ant in there to leave in peace. And we'll use another one just for looking at. Next, let's make out our composition. So now that we have our subject matter all prepped and ready to go, let's start. If you are following along at home, you can just follow along to what I'm painting here, or if you've got your own subject that you have laid out, feel free to follow that and just use all of the tips that I'm giving you here and steps of the process and just employ them in your own work. Or you can just sit back, relax and enjoy, you know, because creativity is a wonderful way to get all the problems off your mind and relax. Okay, so let's start. First, I'm going to use pencil to situate my fruit on my piece of paper. I'm going to be lifting this up because when it's down like this, you guys see it from a different viewpoint, and I kind of can't hover over because the camera is just above me. So you can start by observing your object, and you see how you've got that circle there. So you place the circle, make it as large as you want to have your fig, and then a smaller circle, and then just join them. If you have been sketching things before, you might not even need the structure system. You can probably just go straight away and sketch it out. Next, I'm going to place my other half-cut figs on here. And see that this one, I'm not gonna do the same thing, but if you still feel that this is something that helps you, please go ahead and do that. So now I have positioned all the figs where I want them. I am going to start looking a little bit more in detail and seeing if I need to add anything else. Now this fig that is not cut, the one that we can see from the outside, has lines going through it, like these little veins. You see? So we can put those through. Vaguely. Remember, don't press on your pencil too hard. I apologize if it's hard to see these things really clearly, but that's what you need to do as well. Make sure you don't press too hard. Otherwise, you are going to run into problems. Let's have a look at this one. So if you pay close attention, you would see that there's almost like a green outline there, but it almost merges into that whiteness here. And then we've got the pink center. So I'm going to mark the pink center. Figs kind of remind me of, you know, these beautiful gemstones that you crack open and then they've got just so much beauty in there hidden. This is what they kind of look like. And then this one as well. So I'm going to add this little detail here, the little bump. That's what they call in Russian, these little things, bumps. Okay. And have the pink flash on the inside here. And place it back. Now I'm going to have a look at the shadows and mark the shadows through. Okay, and now I can put my pencil and my eraser away and start working with paint. If you have really soft paint, like what I have, I've got a lot of sort of schmenke colors and they are quite soft, so you can just add a little bit of water in it and it becomes activated very quickly. Some brands they need a little bit more work, like some of the colors that I have here from the White Nights. You know, if you want to use them, it's a good idea to add some water. So depending on what you've got, you can add a little bit of water like this. Where are my White Night colors? Like this one here. I don't know if I'll be using that blue, but just in case, and a little bit of here. And so when the time comes to pick this color up, it's already all nice and soft for you. But if you're working with paints freshly squeezed, then you really don't need to worry about that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working with this one, just because if I'll be working on these bottom ones first, by the time I'm going to come to work on this, I might be smudging it and I would need to wait for this to fully dry. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to have a look at the actual fruit and dampen this area with water, like this. I'm not going over the shadow, just this area here. Then I'm gonna go for some pink, very light pink, and apply it on the center. Soften it and make it around just a little bit, because you can see how that color bleeds on the actual fruit as well. And I'm going to do a very similar thing with the green as well. For that I'm going to mix a little bit of green gold together with Hooker's green. And apply that very light color through. And then I'm going to mix a darker shade, pretty much using the same colors, just adding a little bit of olive green to that. And going with a thin line just on the outside. It's beneficial if the other areas next to it are a little bit damp, because then you get this natural transition of color. Now I'm going to get a little bit of ochre and add a little bit of ochre through, because even though it looks like white flash, it's actually not white. sort of a bit of yellowy and green shades in there. Alright, so you can see how now this is dry. And remember, I always say in all of my watercolor tutorials, just to remind you guys that whenever watercolor dries, it dries more lighter in shade. So now we're going to have to just make it a little bit more pronounced. Like this. And you see how some shades are a little bit darker? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of the darker shades, just overall. I'm not working on any patterns or anything like this. And I'm also going to take a little bit of this, it's called Madder Lake Red, and mix that with a little bit of Van Dyke Brown. So to kind of help us create that sort of a shadowy shade, you know, that sort of a this kind of a color, kind of like a wine that's gone off or something like that. And now while this is drying, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna work on the outside again. So a bit of yellow, and I'm gonna add some ochre to it. Here we can also use a bit of that Van Dyke Brown with a tiny bit of red now, and just mark that bottom bit, that leftover thing from the flower. So now I have mixed a little bit of transparent pyrrole orange into the red, and I'm going to add a little bit of texture with specifically using that color. And I'm gonna go over the shadow patch as well, and this time, I'm gonna use neutral tint with some red. Just to soften the skull and create that bleed that's happening here too. Now I'm going to go for the little brush, and I'm going to add a little bit of those yellow spots. The little seeds. And just let it run. Next I'm going to get a little bit more detailed to get a bit more shape. So for that I'm just mixing a little bit of Van Dyke Brown with neutral tint and with that deep red that I was using before. I'm going to start with this. It's still a bit damp, so it's still running a little bit. And now I'm going to have very little of that color on the brush. And bring out some of these beautiful and you see how you don't need to be doing every single one of them. You just sort of spot them, mark them, give that visual effect. And all the other colors that we've layered up here before, they already create that sort of uneven look for us. Now I'm going to mix some more of that madder like red and some of the spiral orange together to create that deep but also sort of almost warmish kind of color. And I'm gonna do a very similar thing, but maybe in smaller spots with that deeper shade, just in some areas, especially here closer to the bottom, because you can see how that's exactly where those accents are happening. If you guys are interested to know the brushes and things that I use, I will put all the names and descriptions under the video, so make sure you go over there and read that. And just to deepen the color through here and through here. Now again, a little bit more attention to the shadow. Mixing same colors with a bit more density now. Okay, now next I would need to add a little bit of white, and I'm going to create little dots. Now this is white gouache. You can also use white watercolor, but I think gouache has more of the opaque color to it. And just in some areas, they smell so nice. I want to eat them. Little reflections of the wet surface. Some reflections are bigger and some smaller. And I'm also going to mix a little bit of yellow into the white and go over some of the, those little seeds. Next, I'm going to go over the shadow, and for shadow I'm going to mix ultramarine blue with Van Dyke brown. It'll create this really neutral color. Adding more water to create a softer edge. If you are enjoying this video, please make sure to go and check out my Patreon page, where for just $2 a month you can support my channel, and for $8 a month you can view all extra videos. It has tutorials, relaxing videos in Russian, different really in-depth tutorials that go over how to draw a human face and so on. You can also do things like video requests. You can go and draw every month to win one of the sketches. Please go over there and check it out. You might find it very interesting and get a lot of very helpful things for yourself. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of the darker color and apply it on the really darker sort of areas of the shadow. Softening the edges, but also darkening them at the same time. And I'm just going to leave that for now. When you are working for, at home by yourself, you don't need to work separately like I'm working here, because you have more freedom to turn your paper around. I just want to keep it very nice and still for you guys, but you can always work on all three simultaneously, especially, you know, like this one and this one, you can work at the same time. So now I'm going to move on to this one. Now this one has this really dark, very plummy kind of color. So for that I'm going to use French ultramarine, a little bit of my burnt umber, and it makes this sort of a really dark, very sort of a muddy kind of a color. But now to that I'm going to add just a tiny little bit of dioxin purple. That's one of my core colors, and you can see just how strong it is, how it just takes over everything. That's why I needed those other colors to dampen it down a bit so that it's not as strong and as vibrant. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give it a very light wash, pretty much over the whole fruit. I want to make sure it's quite light because I want my highlights to be quite light as well. There are pretty much almost no really white highlights that are quite large, which means we will always be able to add a little bit more of you know, white paint like we did here if we need to, but I don't want to leave really white areas. So there we go. And now I'm going to start adding more of the intense color while it's still a bit damp. You see how quickly it just gets dark? I didn't even reload my brush, but it's that purple. It's so powerful. It's incredible. Just gonna wash a little bit out water. You can pretty much see the shape already, but it's very light in terms of color. I'm going to also add, if you pay a bit of attention, you'd be able to see that there's quite a bit of red that's sort of peeking through. So I'm gonna mix a little bit of red and some orange and some brown, because it's a very sort of a deep red, and add a little bit of that color. And just let it around like this. There's also a little bit of, see, I'll just turn it over, there's almost like a yellowy greeny sort of a patch, so I'm gonna pick up a bit of ochre and I'm gonna add some of those colors through as well. There's a bit here. So now I'm gonna leave that to dry a little bit, and while this is sort of drying, I'm going to mix some more of that purpley color. So this dioxin purple and a little bit of neutral tint this time, because this time I'm working on darker areas, and a little bit of French ultramarine as well. I just want to bring your attention to, remember when I said I don't want really bright highlights, and I went over the whole thing with a purple sort of a shade, and it kind of looked like I've gone over all the highlights and made them really dark. This is the point where you can see, because the object itself is so dark, those highlights, not even close to white, see, they're still bright, even though they were quite a deep sort of a purple, you know, when we went over them. So I need to go over them again. And now I'm gonna go with another layer of pretty much the same color, just deepening some areas. You always want to cross-reference your colors, so this looks white compared to this, but does this look white compared to that? It's really hard for us with the way our eyes are set up to judge color on its own. Have you seen that experiment where someone holds up a white piece of paper against a black background and asks you what color it is, and you think that's white, and then they bring in another white piece of paper which is whiter, and you realize that that first piece of paper, it's actually gray. So it's the contrast, you know, it's those values, they appear to us in the proper way only when you have something else to compare them against. So please remember that whenever you're working on anything, drawing or painting, anything. Very softly, I'm touching it so softly with a brush, because you want to have more control over your colors. And now to create an even richer color and darker shade, I'm gonna go for neutral tint, and I'm also going to get some quinacridone purple in there, just a little bit to warm it up. If you don't have that color, you can either use purple, you can use like a deep red like that. I've just done that there. It would work fine. You don't want to add too much water, because now it's going to be reasonably, well, you don't work with watercolor thick, but this is probably the thickest you would want to work with watercolor. And just add some dark shadows. I'm also gonna go for just plain French ultramarine blue and add some blue as well. Those are very similar colors to if you were painting an eggplant. And I think eggplant is, you know, even shinier because it's got a really glossy sort of a surface. So you would have stronger highlights. Now I'm gonna go back into the shadow color. So remember, for the shadow, used burnt umber, oops, and ultramarine blue. And now I'm gonna go for an overall wash. I'm also gonna go for the little brush and create a little bit of texture on the little, what would that be called in English? That is so, it's a leftover from the flower, but is there a specific name for it? In Russian it's called a bum, as I said on that one. It's called a bum. Okay, now adding some deeper grooves on the texture of the, see, just these ones there. I find that this is the most natural shadow color that you can mix, is mixing blue and brown together. If you're using black, then you get this really sort of almost like a dead, just gray color. So you want to make sure your shadows still look quite lively. And you can always control if you want them warmer or cooler. If you want them cooler, you just add more blue, and if you want them warmer, you add more brown. Okay, now I'm gonna wait for it to dry and then go over with some darker shades again, closer to the object. And now, while this is going on, I am going to work on this. Now I will show you, because it's so similar to this, I will show it to you in a sped up version so that I'm not taking up your time. And you can just see, you know, the process. It will be very similar to this. The only difference is that for the outside I'm going to be using same colors that I've used here. Okay, so now I've done the majority of the stuff on the inside, just couple little spots, and now I'm going to work on the shadow. Now while this is drying, I'm going to go over with the white over this and this first here. And I'm also going to mix a little bit of this white with the ochre color. And I'm going to put these little spots and things on as well. They're not very bright, but they are there. And I need a bit of this opacity to be able to cover the darker color. Let's have a look a bit closer. So some dots and things for a little bit of that extra texture. And now a little bit of white on this little guy here. Fruit is so moist when it's cut. I'll just add a little bit more here too. Gouache sometimes also when it dries can go a little bit murky. Remember, you can always, with these little things, it's pretty much almost impossible to reserve them while you're painting, unless you're working on a really large size. But remember that you can always use masking fluid as well. The only problem with masking fluid is that it's quite hard to get it so detailed as well. So that's why in this situation using something like this is fine. And now I'm just going to darken the shadow. So go over it again. And remember, you don't really have to. Something like that is sufficient enough. But if you want to go a little bit more, you know, into the contrasty sort of a look, then make sure you pre-mix your color again and just go over it again. And you see I'm not going over the whole thing, just like I did there. I'm going closer. I'm going darker, closer to the object. Okay. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, followed along, or maybe you just decided to watch and relax and pick up some tips. Either way, I really hope you found it helpful. And I would also like to say a big thank you to all of my patrons for their support. If you are guys not on Patreon, make sure you go and you check it out, because I have so many more videos, tutorials, and a whole bunch of other stuff that you might really enjoy. And I hope you guys have a lovely day, and as always, thank you so much for painting with me.